Tansei, Dr. Rebecca Major. I want to talk to you now today about non-status communities and people. I'm sure people have wondered, how did we end up with non-status groups in Canada? And there are actually several explanations for that. So the first is that there were some that were enfranchised through policy. So beginning in 1869, the government started an enfranchisement policy, and in order to be enfranchised, you had to be of good moral character, could read and write, be debt-free, and you went through a 2-year probation. And once you went through that successfully, you became a legal British citizen as opposed to being an Indian subject to policy. This was also possible for people who entered certain vocations, such as lawyers, priests, or served in the military. It was through this policy that if a First Nations woman married someone not considered an Indian by the federal government, she would lose her identity as an Indian person. The government could use this tool to also remove people from communities, especially people who were politically active or created discontent. So in some cases, people were denied acknowledgement of Indian status because they were left out of treaty, which left people off of ban lists in the numbered treaty areas. This happened with Witchican Lake in Saskatchewan, who became a late adhesion to treaty after originally being left out. And there were also communities in the numbered treaty territory who were removed, such as the Papa Chase community in Alberta, who were removed from treaty and disbanded. Some of those people had their band membership transferred to other communities. Some of those people took scrip as they were able to prove that they had a Métis parent, and others were put on the Edmonton Stragglers list. Today, that would be known as the General List. In 2018, the Assembly First Nations acknowledged and formally recognized Papa Chase Band as a community and are now working to have the band reinstated with recognition by Indigenous Affairs. This is not to say you always need treaty to have status. In the numbered treaty territory, there are the Dakota people, for example, who were not included in the treaty signing because they were considered visitors. They were visitors because they came up across the medicine line with Sitting Bull, and they were granted permission to stay when Sitting Bull returned to the United States. Today, there are discussions about bringing Dakota people into treaty in Saskatchewan. So in the East, there was also reserve creation, and some were collectively enfranchised, and communal land holdings were transferred to fee simple in the 1869 enfranchisement. This is particular for communities in New Brunswick. One community, for example, is Nipisiguit, the Nipisiguit Mi'kmaq community. That is my mamere's community, my dad's mom. In 1819, her great-grandfather secured a communal land holding for 38 families as a way to keep the community together. 50 years later, the federal government enfranchised the whole community, allegedly because they were deemed not needing welfare. Although not listed as a band with Indian Affairs, the government kept tabs on the community until the Indian Act legislative changes of 1951. Today, most of the community remains on the original communal land, including my cousins, and actively engage with neighboring registered communities. When Newfoundland joined Confederation in 1949, the Mi'kmaq of that area were purposefully left out, and only at the end of the 20th and 21st century are people recognized, such as the Halapu Mi'kmaq First Nation. Originally, there were people saying that there were no Indians in Newfoundland. But when you look further into it, it appears that this was done with intent based on decisions made by the colonial state. Prior to Confederation, the Mi'kmaq of Newfoundland held more rights than Indigenous people that were part of the Confederation of Canada, their counterparts on the mainland. So it was believed by the Newfoundland colonial government that it would be putting people at a disadvantage by acknowledging them as Indian peoples, and made the decision to deny them their identity. Not long after Confederation, the Indigenous peoples in Newfoundland and Labrador organized in collectives to assert identity and to have legal Indigenous recognition of rights. The first band recognized in Newfoundland under the Indian Act was the Maya-Piguk First Nation in 1984, known as Con River. In 2002, talks began about developing a second Mi'kmaq band on the island of Newfoundland, the Halapu Mi'kmaq First Nation, which became a recognized band through order of council in 2011. Now, another way that we have non-status communities are people that were left out in central Canada. So historically, the Algonquin and Nipissing peoples were discussed jointly in colonial documentation, and the two groups worked together, engaging the British Crown through petitions when addressing their grievances. A long diplomatic history exists between the Algonquin and Nipissing people and the colonizers. As competition between the French and English continued throughout the 18th century on the continent, the Algonquin and Nipissing peoples played a significant role in assisting with diplomacy and peace. Beginning in the 1970s, Algonquin peoples petitioned for lands and recognition of rights to land, and did so for almost 100 years. Near the end of the 20th century, in the 1970s, the people started to look into their land history as a result of the creation of the Indian Claims Commission and the Calder case. In this exploration, it was found there were grounds to pursue a modern claim, and that most of the people never went to reserve, and there was cause to include non-status Algonquin communities in the modern land claim. This claim is still being negotiated. However, it's significant because it's the first settlement of land claims that involves non-status First Nations people. Today, we see that there are several reasons for non-status Indigenous communities in Canada, making every situation unique, as populations are unique with their own colonial history and impacts. These stories are the result of colonial legacies of the Crown determining identity, and not how people in community traditionally understand themselves. So people were either missed purposefully, such as the Mi'kmaq people of Newfoundland and other Indigenous populations that are part of Newfoundland and Labrador that now have recognition. There's the Algonquin of Ontario that are now recognized collectively as non-status. There are individuals that have been left out, as well as communities that were left out through enfranchisement, and there were communities that were removed from treaty. So there's a variety of reasons on why we have non-status communities, collectives, and people in Canada today.